My dad was an artist. I never got back I never got to take him back to Newfoundland. It was always our dream to go back together and see what it was like. He was an artist, and this was a watercolor that I found after he died in a pile of things in his basement that he had done. He talked about it. My mom talked about it, but they weren't sure where it was. So I found it, and it was a watercolor that he had done of a Newfoundland fisherman. And I thought, you know, that needs to go back to Newfoundland. So that's in our living room. And that was one of his art and why we're in Newfoundland. So let's see what the next.
Awesome.
Oh, okay. So is this the next?
That should work now.
Okay. All right. Here we go. This one. So this picture finds its place in our living room in Newfoundland, and it was because of him that we're there. Well, when Dad was in Newfoundland, he purchased these rugs. And these rugs come from the Grenfell mission, which was started by a Dr. Wilfred Grenfell in St. Anthony, which is in the northern part of Newfoundland and Labrador. And he came from England and began to build a hospital, hired and trained lots of nurses, brought in doctors from even the United States to provide medical services to the people. One of the things he believed was that the women should have a job where they could get some of their own money. They were alone during the fishing season, raising 16 children sometimes, and it was a very poor society. They did they made hooked mats. They brought that with them from England. And so there was, during that early time in the early 1900s, the mission asked that people around the world send in their old silk stockings, and they dyed them. And then they got artists from the States, Philadelphia and New York, who drew the pictures, and they provided kits to the women. And the women of Newfoundland hooked these mats and sold them, and that was their money. These mats, this was the last years of these mats. They were sold in stores in the United States, but the last years in the 40s, they were sold to the servicemen. And these were the mats that my father brought back to the States after the war. That large one with the ducks hung above our living room couch in the house where I grew up in Pennsylvania. And this other one, which is my favorite, is, of course, a polar bear. These were made with silk stockings, and the hooking is really spectacular. I think there's 400 hooks every square inch, and they're very finely done. They're nothing close to the way I hook, but they are beautiful, and they're back in Newfoundland where they came from. There's one hanging in our home in Elliston. So hooking was done by the women in Newfoundland. When I asked my friends, you know, how did you use them? They say, well, we dropped them on the floor in front of the bed so that you could have warm feet when you got out of bed. None of mine are dropped on the floor because they also are very fragile, particularly the background, which is made from burlap, which is, if you wet it, it pretty much disintegrates. So I would say that the things that I hook are from inspirations of buildings and landscapes that I see, of stories and pictures of family and friends, and stories and pictures that I have, you know, that other folks have told me. And I think it makes a diary for me. That's what Lee says. He says, I think this is like a diary. And that's why I entitled this Hook Me a Story. This is the first mat, and this is kind of a transition from the history to my matting life. This is the first one I made, and my teacher was Shirley Ryan, who was a woman who grew up in this town of Birchie Cove, which is down the road from Elliston. This is significant in that the frame is a traditional frame that the Newfoundland women used to make their mats. And Shirley's partner made frames for each of us that were in the class. Shirley drew the picture on the burlap, and it was what she saw out of her kitchen window. And then we all got together with our t-shirts because that's what she was using to hook. And that's what I use. I use recycled t-shirts that I cut in strips. And I sometimes recycle the burlap by getting coffee bags from Anderson's Coffee here in Austin. So this was the first mat.
How big is it?
Well, let me show you in relation to where it is. This mat, I found that I could not use. It was really hard for me to use the frame, gave me a backache. So when a friend came to visit from Austin, I said, what shall I do with this, Mamie? And she said, hang the whole thing on your wall. So here it is on our kitchen wall. And it's been there ever since. It's my first. And now I use a hoop that's about 16 inches in diameter, and that's wooden, and that's more manageable because I like to have to sit by a window and look out at what I'm at the cove while I'm hooking. But here it is. This was one of the first ones that I drew, and this was again Hook Me a Story. I was looking back across the cove to our home, which is on the right. And this is stylized. And then the Orange Hall, which is next to our home, which was the old lodge, which is now a restaurant in Elliston. And the United Church, which is the old church in town. You can tell that I was starting to collect t-shirts because the colors are kind of strange. And I even found some fuzzy yarn at the dollar store to make the flowers, the purple flowers in the foreground. This was one that is again stylized. This is our house looking out over the cove and the ridge that we see above the water and the row of spruce trees that are out there. I decided I would do some small mats because I thought that would be easy, but it's not. So these are about 6 by 6. Here's the United Church in Elliston, the Orange Hall, and that's the Bonavista Lighthouse. And here they are displayed on the wall. They're about the size of potholders. I haven't done any that small since. This was the one that Lee suggested. We look out our windows in the sunset, and in the fall, the crows begin to gather to migrate, and they're on the wire, the telephone wires, and that's in front of the sunset. And there they are in our hallway. The painting by a Newfoundland, a young artist, and that's a provincial park with a lot of sea stacks that with similar colors of purple and sunset. This is a smaller mat. It's about 12 by 12, but this is a traditional style. This is called hit or miss is a style. And the women saved every little scrap of yarn or wool, or in my case, t-shirt material that they had left over, and they would hook everything that they had. Some women had no wool that they could use, and they even hooked using the threads from the burlap material. I've not done that, but this is my hit or miss. And here it is. I use it as a mat on one of our tables. And here, this is one of a moose. I use hit or miss, the technique. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go back.
Yeah.
Go back.
On each side of the moose. Can this be lightened? Okay. So you can see that as part of the trim. The moose was introduced to Newfoundland, I'm not sure when, but many years ago, because the people had no fish to eat. They sold most of their fish, and what they ate were the tongues and the cheeks and the roe from the fish. And then they got some seals in the fall of the year, I'm sorry, in the early spring of the year, when the seals came in, and they were harvested, but they had very little red meat. So moose were introduced to the island, and there's a big moose hunt in the fall, and moose roaming all over the island. It's very rural. There are very few accidents unless you hit a moose. And we try not to drive at night when we're there, because they are black and they are big and they stand in the middle of the road. So anyway, I did a moose, and also the background of the moose, the green part, is another technique in which, if you don't have enough of one green that you want to use as background, this is where I use several shades of green, and then pull them randomly and hook them to give some depth to the hooking. And this hangs above the bed in our guest room. Here you can see the hoop that I use, and also the burlap with the drawing that I make with magic marker, with a I'm sorry, not a magic, yes, a black magic marker. And this is the beginning of a mat that's got a fish and a heart done in the same style as the background and the moose, where I pull randomly from the different shades of red. And that's a mat that I use on our coffee table. This one's sort of out of order, but I didn't know where to put it. This is a rug, quite a large rug that's about, I'd say, 4 by 5 feet. Hangs on our wall now. This was done by my grandfather after he retired. This was done with wool. He retired. He was an accountant. He wanted a craft, and so he hooked a few rugs just in the few years before he died. And I drew this one, and when I was, I guess, 13, the date's there on the bottom. I think it's 1958, and he hooked it. So that's back in Newfoundland now too. And I just wanted to show it as something that is representative of a place. That was an imaginary place, and that was done by a family member. This is the first one that I did that had people in it. And this was from the memory of a photograph that my mother had of my grandmother in her garden with my mother and her stuffed bear standing in Grammy's garden. Grammy was always dressed in a white shirt. I remember that. Of course, when I remember her, she wasn't wearing long dresses, but in the photograph she was, and her apron in her garden. And here's where she and my mother hang with my grandfather's rug on the right, and the hit or miss mat on the basket table. There's some really old quilt tops that I decided I would just hang there. They have not been quilted, but they are hand done. This is a photograph of my cousin's granddaughter wearing a velvet hat that her grandparents bought her when they visited us in Newfoundland. And I love that picture. And so I decided, okay, I'll try to hook it. So I drew it. I always draw them on, again, with a black marker on white paper, and then I trace them onto the burlap. And this was the picture in progress. It's finished. And here it is hanging on the wall. This is the only mat that's in Austin, and it's not here. This is, I made this for my grandson when he was born. This was his cat, Suki. And that one's got some fuzzy chenille wool, not wool, but yarn that, again, I got at the dollar store, and some t-shirts. You can see I shaded in the background the blue around the stars, and I put some fuzzy stuff on the cat. The story of this is that his beloved cat Suki died last year, and so now this hangs, his mother hung it low on the wall in his bedroom. It was over his bed, but now it's low on the wall over a couch that he sits on to play and read, and he can now pet his cat while he's resting on his little chair underneath. So I thought that was pretty sweet. This is a similar one that I had done before Suki, of our cat, Jack, who traveled with us from Austin to Newfoundland for 10 years. Jack had been an outside cat, and he took many, many journeys to Newfoundland. He had good sea legs. He was on the ferry about 20 times, and he did quite well in Newfoundland. And there he is hanging on a low wall in our living room. And there's the ugly stick. I brought that out when Tom and Kay were doing their presentation on musical instruments. That's a traditional instrument, in quotes, from Newfoundland. This is one that I did from a photograph, and of course a story of my father and our son, Josh, fishing. My father and mother took me to the Jersey Shore for a week, 2 weeks in the summer for vacation. And my father loved to fish from the surf and off the docks into the bay. And this was a stylized version of a picture of he and my son, or our son, Josh, who never caught a fish that large, but looks good anyway, standing on the dock, getting ready to fish or finishing fishing. This is one of myself and two friends sitting on the beach in Elliston. Believe it or not, we have a little beach in our town, and we all wore hats. And it's just like it is usually. It's too cold to swim in, but on the days when it's warm enough, it's pretty crowded and lots of people in that water. I've never been that brave, but I have gotten in up to my waist. So that was the beach. That was one of the early ones that I did, and that's all t-shirt material. And here's the beach with the girls and Daddy and our son in our sunroom. This is a photograph of my husband, Lee, And our grandson, Alex, when he was a baby, he's 7 now, reading from a favorite book. And this one I took pretty much from this photograph. And here it is as a hooked rug mat. And here it is hanging in Alex's little bedroom in Newfoundland. This is a photograph of Alex when he was, oh, I think 2 or 3 years old. He came to Newfoundland with his parents and he was running down the beach in Elliston. We call it Sandy Beach. These are pretty rare in Newfoundland, but this is a really nice one. And people come from around the little communities in the summer when it's a hot day, which doesn't happen too often. But I love the way the shadows were and the footprints. And I thought, hey, this would be a good one to hook. So here I am beginning the hooking. I always lay it over the couch because Lee's my critic for colors. And I use lots of gray, trying to get the shades in the sand and against the water. Here it is, finished. And this is a better picture of it. This is one of the larger ones that I've done, although it's not very big at all. And here it is hanging on the wall with the Grenfell mat in our entryway. This is one of the last ones I've done. I did this 2 years ago. We weren't there for most of the year and the year before during COVID. So this is one of the ones that I made. I think there's 2 where I didn't actually, it's not my original drawing. This was a quilt design and I love the colors. And this is a Christmas celebration in a town called Portergrave. We've never been there, but they decorate all the boats in the harbor, and I just love the colors, so I hooked it. And here you can see, this is the entrance to our home. You can see the window, the seat where I hooked from, and the window looking out over the cove and onto the Atlantic Ocean. This is my next hook, and this is the photograph of Alex a year or so ago on the beach in Florida with his grandmother. So I thought that would be a good companion to him on the beach at 2 in Newfoundland. I haven't drawn it yet, but I think it'll work out. This is just an example of my craft corner in Newfoundland with all the saved t-shirts. Some are old t-shirts. All of them have a story because most of them were given by friends or ones that, I outgrew or threw away or wanted to throw away or, stained or whatever. But lots of t-shirts and lots of colors now. And there you can see, I do use some yarns, but not very many. For information, this is Deanne Fitzpatrick's advertisement for her studio. She's the Newfoundlander who's made her career hooking and teaching and dyeing yarns, and she has a shop in Amherst, Nova Scotia. But if you want to hook, you can join her in her website. If you buy one of her kits, she has all the instructions. She has the basic hoops, the hooks. Traditionally, the hook was made from a nail, but we've come a little bit beyond that. There is a wooden end on our hooks that we can hold on to. And she also has weekly and monthly classes that she does online. So I thought I'd give that.
What are you going to say about how it takes to make some of these maps?
Oh, how
Just
long?
an example.
That's a good question. It doesn't take long to hook them. The hooking is rather fast. I'd say I might take a month to finish one. What takes the time is the inspiration and just coming up with, what I want to draw, how I want it to look, and then finding the colors and then, checking with Lee throughout the hooking process for whether the colors are right and those. So I'd say a month. I've had people, want me to hook for them, and it's not the hooking that's hard. Hooking's easy. It's figuring out what you want to hook. And so it's nice to start. I started with one of Deanne's kits. In fact, this is it. This is a wool. She used to do her kits with yarn and with wool fabric that she cut in strips. Wool fabric is getting harder and harder to find. She grew up with five sisters, and this one is entitled "I Only Told My Sister." That was the first one that I did, which was one of her kits. And this is Newfoundland. You can see Elliston, where we live. And then you get the ferry from Port aux Basques and drive the entire island. And you see where Gander is, and St. John's, the capital. Oops, what did I do?
No.
That's it, the end. But before we end, I wanted to read something, if you don't mind. I got this last week after Rick had already done the slideshow. And so this came from Diane Fitzpatrick. Every week she does a Sunday little prose or a little story. And I thought this was so appropriate. So if you'll indulge me, I'll read it. It's very short. Hi, Claudia. Quote, "You're not really one to hide in the corner yourself," unquote. He said when I told my husband he loved an audience. And I thought, you are right. If you got something you want to share, share it. Step into the light, show your talent, tell the story, and bask in a bit of fun. Who will care in 20 years? You might as well show your rugs. You might as well tell others what they are about. You are here right now. Listen to the rhythm. Dance to the fire. You are here right now. Step into the light. In this time, in this place.
Okay, we
So
have
thank you.
a few minutes for questions. Let me get where I can see everybody. Yeah, all right, about that. There we go. Okay, if there's questions, you can unmute yourselves and ask a question, or hold up your finger or hand and then unmute yourselves.
Can you hear?
Michelle, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Michelle.
She may not
You're
hear.
muted.
Hey, there.
Go.
There you go.
Well, I just wanted to be unmuted, but I just have a comment, not a question. That was so delightful. You're quite an artist, and I love your designs. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I don't share them very much, and I appreciate that.
And of course, I also enjoyed seeing Newfoundland. I had no idea what it was like.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Yes,
what you
I
said.
also
It's
enjoyed
breaking up.
seeing, I also enjoyed seeing Newfoundland because I had no idea
Oh,
what it is like.
well, it's like one thing is, it's like going back to the 50s when I grew up. It's a very, very rural place with very kind, generous, and helpful people. We've
And
made many friends there. And
the occasional
I'm
iceberg,
sorry.
the occasional iceberg floating by.
Yes, we live on Iceberg Alley, and when you look out our front window, you look across a cove in town where the fishermen used to leave and into the North Atlantic. And they come down from Greenland and they go right past us. Sometimes they even float into the cove, depending on when how the wind is. But there's been a couple of years we didn't see any, and then there's been years when they've just been so full that, you know, every day. Last year was an average year, but you know, we would see them come through every week or so. And it's pretty spectacular. Yes.
Yeah.
Margaret,
Margaret.
Margaret, yes, Margaret Orange. I was curious, you say you use t-shirts.
Yes.
How do you use t-shirts? I mean, to think to me, you've got to have something thread-like, but you've got this big old t-shirt.
Right.
It?
And I should have said that. Those of you that quilt probably use a rotary cutter to cut your fabric. And I use a rotary cutter like the quilters use. I use a metal ruler, and I use a board that it's called a board that is self-healing. So you can cut fabric on that. It's a soft material that self-heals, and it's marked with inches and meters. And I cut the t-shirts in about 1/4 to 1/2 inch strips, depending on the heaviness of the t-shirt.
so you don't use the collars or the cuffs or any of those sleeves?
If I have to, because you know, you don't want the strips are about this long that you want to use to hook. And you hook from the technique I use, you hook from underneath the burlap, and you have your hand underneath with your t-shirt material or your yarn, and you poke through and pull it up in the burlap. So it has to be like a piece of heavy, kind of medium-sized yarn. I hook every 2 or 3 holes in the burlap. Now, those Grenfell mats, those women were hooking several hundred hooks every square inch. I am not, I don't use silk stockings for one thing, and I'm not a purist, but those are beautiful, beautiful mats. Mine are I'm really committed to recycling, and so that's how I do it. Does it make sense?
So you have to have a burlap to really your back, and that's your basis, and then
Yes, the burlap.
And that's what you draw the picture on.
Yes, the burlap is the base, and you can buy burlap. I think they used to sell it at Walmart. You can also, I get burlap coffee bags from Anderson's Coffee. I've used some of those to hook, and they work fine. You just don't want to get them wet because they fall apart. That's why I don't put them on the floor. And if you get to Leanne's, I'm sorry, yeah, website, the hooker from Nova Scotia, you can purchase all of those materials too, and like you can also purchase them on Amazon.
Thank
Yes.
you. Beautiful display.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think you need to explain what's behind you.
Oh, okay. Behind me is a quilt that my grandmother made for me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, probably 50 years ago. She didn't do the quilting. Everything's hand done excepting the background quilting, which the church ladies did back in the day in Pennsylvania when they were still quilting in the churches. And I understand that they're still quilting in Austin at Tarrytown Methodist.
It's really gorgeous.
Viv, did you? Thank you.
Do you dye the strips after you cut them, or do you dye the whole t-shirt?
I don't dye anything. Now, Deanne will dye wool. I mean, she has beautiful handmade wools, but I don't dye anything. I just, you tell people that if you have old t-shirts you're going to throw away, throw them my way.
Are you collecting
And so I
t-shirts?
collect, not anymore.
Oh.
I have lots
Oh,
of
shucks.
t-shirts.
So
I'm starting to get-
the t-shirts are already colored?
They're already colored, and it doesn't matter if they're stained or you can always cut around them, but no, they're already colored. So no, I haven't dyed any t-shirts. I suppose you could, but it's
Amazing how you can
interesting.
get so many different color t-shirts. I didn't realize.
Yeah,
that.
and that's a good thing. Yeah. And if you have a t-shirt material that's printed with designs, small designs of different colors, that's what you use for rocks because it kind of gets variegated on the canvas. So yeah, it's kind of fun.
Your work is very beautiful.
I'm sorry.
Your work is very beautiful.
Thank
Your
you.
work is
It
very
means a
beautiful.
lot to me. There's a story in every one of those pictures.
Are you going to a museum eventually?
I think the ones from Grenville will go to a museum. Those are I guess very soft. Yes, and I just found this book. Can you
I can see it.
this was printed maybe
There.
5 years ago, and it's called Silk Stocking Mats, and it's a collection of all the Grenfell mats. Which is really interesting. It tells about the mission and the examples of these mats. Some of these women were so artistically inclined that they went to art schools in the United States. Dr. Grenfell was from Great Britain, but he married a socialite from the United States. And so she had connections in New York and Philadelphia, even though she stayed with him until they both died in Newfoundland in the 40s, I think in 1940. She died in 39 and he died in 40. But they're really collectible now. And he really believed that the women needed to have their own money, what little it was. For instance, that mat that my father bought during the war cost less than $5. So they were selling a little bit of money, what meant a lot to them. And of course, those were different times. It was during the Depression. But they did have outlets in New York and in Philadelphia where they sold mats. They had artists coming into Newfoundland to draw them. And they would make up a kit on each of the mats, and they would take them by boat to the little outport villages along the coast and drop them off for the women. And they would then hook and sell them. So it's an interesting story. He was a really interesting man. He was a tough man, and he most of the medical work that he did was delivering babies and pulling teeth. But he also introduced a lot of health techniques to the folks. They would live in these small huts in very cold weather with a fire going, and close everything up. And he encouraged them to open the windows and get fresh air. And so there's a lot of interesting stories about him. He would climb icebergs and dive off of them and swim.
Cool.
There's pictures of him doing that. But he brought in a lot of medical students from the United States, and they did some training there. In fact, some of his closest assistants were physicians that had been trained in the United States. He's an interesting story in and of itself. And his hospital and cottage hospitals in those very rural areas of Labrador still exist. And if you go on the website, you can still buy mats. They're not silk stockings, but you can buy mats, and you can buy some other crafts that he had. He had someone in England, I believe, who developed a cloth, a densely woven cotton cloth for him that was used for parkas and clothing because it was waterproof and but breathable. He's an interesting story.
Silk stockings, did they be able to add color to them, or what did they do?
Did they what?
On the silk stockings, did they dye them or do they add color on them?
Yes, those were dyed. In fact, there's some people some women that I've met that were from St. Anthony's, which is in the northern peninsula of Newfoundland. And she said as a little girl, she remembered seeing the colored silk stockings hanging on the lines and drying. Yes, they dyed those. And I don't know if they cut them or not. I don't know how they were cut. But yes, and then they started using nylon stockings and other materials. Traditionally, the women would take old clothing and cut them into strips and make the mats. And I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but Rick and I were talking about it. I belong to a craft group in Elliston, in our little town, and I'm the only one that hooks. The other women, who are all Newfoundlanders, do knitting, and they do a lot of quilting. And they all say, I remember when my grandmother and mother hooked, but I never learned. And it says in this book that it was a craft of poverty, and the mothers didn't teach their children their girls how to do it. So none of them learned from their mothers, which I thought, kind of bore out for me, because my friends all say, no, my mother never taught me. I'm sure some of them did, but none that I know.
Okay, any last questions? Otherwise, we will end this one and plan for the
Just
next one.
thank you so much. It was
Thank you for
so
coming
fascinating.
and listening. And my friends in Newfoundland have said, be sure you get it. Be sure you show it to us.
Yeah, the combination of the hooking and the pictures and where they came from and the history, that's a wonderful combination.
Mhm.
Thank you. I enjoyed doing it. It was really nice after I talked to Rick and saw Tom and Kay's presentation. I was really inspired, and had a lot of fun taking the pictures in the house and revisiting all the thoughts that I had when I did them. So my husband said too, it's really your diary, Claudia. It's really a diary. And I think that's true. It's a diary of things that I remember from my childhood and from the more recent times, in Newfoundland and the family. And so there will be more, I hope.
Good deal. Thank
Thank
you all
you
for
so much.
participating today. We will be in touch.
And I'll leave you with one thought about Newfoundland. The weather is everyone asks about the weather. Oh, he can't.
No, go ahead. Haven't stopped it.
Most of the questions are about the weather. And yes, the weather can be miserable. But the Newfoundlanders will say to you, you didn't come here for the weather. So it's true.
It's very cold in the
place.
summer.
I'm sorry.
This is very cold in the summer.
Well, it's like a nice brisk fall Austin day. That's about as warm as it gets. Last summer we had a lot of fog, and the Newfoundlanders will say it's all about the wind, because it can be 70 degrees, but if the wind's blowing from the north, it's cold. So yes, the summers are cool. Sometimes it will snow in June, but you always have a raincoat and a windbreaker with you, and you don't let it stop you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Rick is-
Okay.
Okay.